Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to Curious Kingdom. Today we are recapping 2009 thriller movie Law-Abiding Citizen. The movie introduces us to Clyde, a skilled tinkerer loved by his family. One day, Clyde's daughter follows in his footsteps and makes a beautiful bracelet for him, also crafting one for her mother. Later, when Clyde answers the door, he's viciously attacked by two burglars who tie him up and ransack the house. During this home invasion, one of the burglars named Darby heartlessly says, "You can't fight fate," before stabbing Clyde. The other burglar, Rupert, tries to escape but is quickly stopped. Tragically, Clyde is forced to watch in horror as his wife is brutally assaulted and murdered by the intruders. Even his daughter is not spared from this nightmare. He can only lie there, trying to scream as he helplessly watches until he passes out. Now, let's shift to Nick, a prosecutor with a 96% success rate, discussing his career goals with his team. However, bad news strikes when a judge rules that DNA evidence from the crime scene is inadmissible. Nick decides not to risk a potential loss at trial and opts for a plea deal, criticizing the justice system's imperfection. During their meeting, Clyde hands Nick some potentially useful notes for the case, but Nick informs him that Darby has agreed to testify against Rupert in exchange for a death sentence, which will likely lead to Rupert's conviction. Darby is set to face a prison sentence of up to 5 years, which deeply disturbs Clyde, who pleads with Nick to reconsider the deal. Unfortunately, the decision has already been made. Nick explains that the justice system operates based on what can be proven, not what is known. He views the outcome as a victory, which Clyde finds disrespectful. During the courtroom proceedings, Rupert is portrayed as the primary offender, while Darby silently mocks Nick's wife and ultimately agrees to the plea bargain. After the trial, Nick addresses the media about the verdict, and Darby sarcastically expresses gratitude for Nick's support. Clyde watches this scene unfold, contemplating justice. 10 years later, Nick's daughter has grown up, but he's still consumed by his work, often missing important moments in her life. His wife, Kelly, is unhappy about his lack of time with their daughter. On the same day, Rupert is scheduled for execution by lethal injection, and Nick chooses to watch it with his colleague, Sarah, instead of attending his daughter's performance. During the execution, Rupert claims he didn't kill Clyde's family, which unnerves Nick and Sarah. However, when the injection is administered, it doesn't immediately end Rupert's life. He experiences excruciating pain and a horrific death. The warden clarifies they are not responsible for this unforeseen agony, as it has never happened before. A policeman arrives and hands the prosecutors a bottle with the phrase "Can't fight fate" written on it. Nick recognizes the phrase "Can't fight fate," and the police begin to investigate Darby's whereabouts. While Darby is enjoying flowers, he receives a call from a muffled voice that reveals personal information about him, making him paranoid. The voice instructs him to look out the window, where he sees police approaching from all sides. In a panic, Darby fires shots at police cars. Afterward, Darby receives another call from the muffled voice, which orders him to dispose of his weapon and go to an abandoned factory to avoid imprisonment. The voice instructs him to approach a police car with a tasered officer inside, who is asleep. Darby seizes the opportunity, taking the officer's weapon and forcing him to drive to a deserted location. Darby forces the officer to kneel but is interrupted by a call that reveals the officer was actually Clyde. Darby attempts to shoot him, but the gun turns out to be a trap, injecting him with a paralyzing serum. Realizing he can't move, Darby is taken to Clyde's warehouse, where Clyde restrains him. Clyde warns Darby that he will experience excruciating pain, meticulously preparing to prolong Darby's suffering as payback. Clyde empathizes with Darby by acknowledging his own helplessness from 10 years ago, stating, "You can't fight fate." He starts recording and proceeds to dismember Darby. Meanwhile, Nick and Sarah are discussing the possible tampering with the lethal injection. Nick doesn't believe Darby is responsible, considering his lack of intelligence to carry out such a plan. Later on, Darby is discovered by the police in 25 different pieces, a shocking and gruesome scene that is relayed to Nick. Sarah comes to a startling realization that Clyde might be the only person with a possible motive. She notes that Clyde has recently liquidated his assets and invested in unusual locations, including the warehouse where Darby's remains were found. The police promptly head to Clyde's residence, where he appears unconcerned and undresses, only showing any reaction as he hears the approaching sirens. Despite his welcoming demeanor, Clyde is taken into custody while giving Nick a menacing death stare, foreshadowing what's to come. During a search of Clyde's house, the police discover law books and a ripped piece of newspaper with a photograph of Nick and Darby shaking hands. Clyde is placed in an interrogation room at the jail, handcuffed. The authorities hope he will confess, but they lack concrete evidence against him. Meanwhile, Nick's daughter receives a recording, supposedly her recital, and pleads with her mother to watch it. Her mother refuses, deciding to watch it later with her father. However, the daughter quietly plays the DVD, instantly regretting it as it reveals footage of Clyde taking revenge against Darby. Nick approaches Clyde and turns off the live feed, putting on a show of approval, pretending that Clyde did the right thing. Clyde indirectly admits that he had contemplated murdering both Darby and Rupert and had been planning ways to carry it out. Nick accepts this as Clyde's confession and tries to leave, but Clyde interjects. He carefully outlines Nick's daily routine and requests that he remains seated. Despite Nick's insistence that their interaction is over, Clyde asserts that anything he said isn't legally binding, as he never explicitly confessed to murder and there's no evidence. Clyde suggests he could claim that the discovery of Darby's corpse in his warehouse was a setup, given his multiple properties across the country. Nick argues that they know Clyde did it, but Clyde retorts that it's not about what they know, it's about what they can prove. Clyde offers a full confession if Nick can do something for him, provide a bet. Nick's ego gets the better of him as he walks out. Jonas, Nick's supervisor, reprimands him for declining the offer, believing that getting a confession in exchange for a mattress, especially with no supporting evidence, is a no-brainer. However, Nick is convinced that Clyde is toying with them, despite Jonas's repeated counsel to take the deal. Clyde eventually obtains the desired mattress, and another inmate expresses interest in it. The warden expresses disappointment with Clyde's behavior during the court proceeding. Nick urges the judge to deny Clyde's request for bail. In his defense, Clyde claims to be a law-abiding citizen and argues that Nick lacks concrete evidence to justify his continued detention without bail. Nick counters by reminding the court that Clyde had agreed to provide a full confession, which he hasn't done. The judge appears swayed by Clyde's argument, and suddenly Clyde begins to applaud. He accuses the judge of being gullible for letting a murderer potentially walk free after hearing a few sweet lines. Clyde's outburst shocks everyone, and he continues to berate the judge until she loses her composure and is escorted out of the courtroom. As a result, the judge denies Clyde's request for bail. In the interrogation room, Clyde claims that the tape he sent to Nick represents good triumphing over evil. He eventually confesses to being the person featured on the recording. However, Clyde insists that he has one more admission to make but requires a favor in return. Nick is annoyed by Clyde's behavior, but Clyde persists and demands a medium-rare 20-ounce steak and an iPod during his prison lunch. As Nick is about to leave, Clyde proposes offering Bill Reynolds' life as his confession. Bill served as Darby's attorney. When Nick returns, Sarah informs him that Bill has been unaccounted for in 3 days. Clyde then speaks directly into the camera, telling Nick that he can secure Bill's survival by fulfilling his requests precisely at 1 p.m. the following day. The following day, the steak is delivered to the prison as requested. However, 5 minutes before 1 p.m., the warden decides to double-check everything. When they arrive at Clyde's cell, they are 8 minutes late. Clyde maintains his composure and reveals Bill's location. He also informs them that the 1 p.m. time was intended for Bill, not himself. Nick hurries to a helicopter, and they fly to the location. Meanwhile, Clyde enjoys his steak and music with his cellmate, seemingly becoming good friends. However, it's all an act by Clyde, who was only interested in the T-bone from the steak. He increases the volume of the music, hands the controller to his cellmate to distract him, and then fatally stabs him repeatedly. Clyde lies down on the bed and relaxes as the warden looks inside, discovering the gruesome scene. Meanwhile, Nick discovers Bill's lifeless body buried with an oxygen mask. It took them roughly 15 minutes to arrive at the scene from the prison. Had Clyde received his lunch at exactly 1 p.m., Bill would still be alive. Shortly after, Sarah sends Nick a message notifying him that Clyde has murdered his cellmate and is being relocated to solitary confinement by the warden. Nick visits Clyde in his cell to understand the motives behind his actions and the rationale for taking so many lives. Clyde explains that he wants everyone to be held accountable for their actions. Nick offers Clyde his daughter's bracelet and questions whether his family would approve of his actions, essentially suggesting that Clyde's revenge is a form of justice. Later, Nick and Jonas meet with a government official who provides them with more information about Clyde. They learn that Clyde is a natural tactician capable of orchestrating murders from a distance, even though he's in prison. Clyde's choice of cellmate to kill was not random but part of a larger plan. The official advises Nick and Jonas to be vigilant for the next move in Clyde's game. He emphasizes that the only way to stop Clyde is to enter his cell and execute him, as Clyde is targeting anyone involved in his family's case. With this information, Nick and Jonas approach Judge Laura, asking her to unintentionally violate Clyde's civil rights by restricting his visitation and communication to ensure everyone's safety. She agrees and signs the necessary document. However, as she answers her phone, it explodes, killing her. In the prison's interrogation room, Nick confronts Clyde about his accomplice and the motive behind his revenge. Clyde becomes furious, feeling that Nick still doesn't grasp his reason. He asserts that if revenge were his goal, he would have targeted Nick's family a decade ago. Clyde gives Nick one final ultimatum: release him before 6 a.m. without any charges, or everyone will suffer the consequences. Subsequently, Clyde is transferred to a maximum security unit escorted by multiple guards. Nick and Sarah meet at the prison, searching through documents for insights into who might be assisting Clyde from the outside. But their efforts prove futile. Sarah begins to doubt their decision to make a deal with Darby in the past. But Nick reassures her that it was the right choice. The district attorney's team stays on site until 6 a.m., at which point Nick sends everyone home to rest. However, when Sarah starts her car, explosives attached to nearby vehicles detonate, resulting in her tragic death. Nick is convinced that someone is aiding Clyde, even though he's still incarcerated. The devastating attack claims the lives of 6 officers. Nick and Jonas meet with the mayor, who expresses shock at the level of destruction one man in custody can cause. In response, she assigns security personnel to protect Nick and Jonas. Nick sends his family to an undisclosed location, referring to it as a vacation, to keep them safe from the escalating danger. They are given instructions to avoid using credit cards or mobile phones, anything that could potentially reveal their whereabouts. Upon returning home, Nick discovers a framed newspaper article indicating that someone has been inside his house. Later, at the prison, Clyde is allowed to take a walk and encounters Nick and a detective. In a fit of rage, Nick physically assaults Clyde, who warns him that this is only the beginning. The detective draws his weapon, but Nick restrains him. Clyde ominously hints that Nick is about to witness something of historical proportions. During Sarah's funeral, Jonas expresses his opinion that they brought this tragedy upon themselves, but Nick remains firm in his belief that they made the right decision. However, he's beginning to question himself. As they enter their secured vehicles, a mysterious individual in black garments takes control of a military drone equipped with weapons. The drone targets and disables their vehicles, causing them to come to a halt. The perpetrator fires at Jonas's vehicle, destroying it entirely and killing everyone inside. In the aftermath, the mayor is shocked and contemplates terminating Nick's employment, as she believes he allowed the situation to escalate. However, to appease the media and relieve pressure, she promotes Nick to the position of district attorney. As a result, the mayor issues an emergency order that restricts movement throughout the city. Upon receiving an email from Sarah's contact about real estate bought by Clyde, Nick conducts research on properties sold in Philadelphia in the last decade and compares their values. Eventually, he discovers that Clyde is the owner of a small garage near the prison. Nick meets up with the detective to investigate the garage, where they find a hole in the floor leading to a tunnel that Clyde dug directly underneath the prison. Shockingly, Clyde had created an entrance into every single cell, revealing that he had planned to kill his cellmate all along. Although the detective checks Clyde's cell, he is nowhere to be found. Under the guise of a janitor, Clyde manages to bypass security and gain access to City Hall by passing a light security check. During their investigation, the detective and Nick discover that Clyde has placed cameras in various locations, including Nick's house. They also find a quote from von Clausewitz suggesting that City Hall is the center of gravity in this scenario. Clyde has set up a bomb intended to kill the mayor, who is scheduled to hold a security meeting soon. Nick and the detective arrive at the scene but must proceed with caution to avoid alerting Clyde that they have uncovered his plan. As Nick and the detective search the 5th floor just beneath the conference room, they come across a suitcase that they believe to be the bomb. The bomb squad expert cautiously opens the suitcase and warns them that the bomb could be triggered by a cell phone, posing an imminent threat. Meanwhile, agents assigned to monitor Clyde's warehouse notice his arrival and alert Nick. Clyde proceeds to his equipment in the tunnel and observes as the meeting begins. He retrieves his cell phone and climbs up to his cell. Suddenly, Nick startles Clyde and holds him at gunpoint, urging him to do the right thing and surrender. Clyde responds by asking if Nick is here to strike one last deal. Nick realizes that Clyde has been trying to convey a message to him all along and declares that he will not negotiate with murderers. He implores Clyde not to proceed with his plan, reminding him that the decision will haunt him for the rest of his life. Clyde apologizes and dials the number to activate the bomb. Nick departs and makes it clear that Clyde's remaining lifetime is about 25 seconds. As the detective seals off the tunnel before leaving, Nick plants the suitcase containing the bomb under Clyde's bed. He glances at his daughter's bracelet one last time before the explosion engulfs Clyde's cell in flames. In a gripping and intense tale of justice, revenge, and moral dilemmas, this movie weaves a complex web of choices and consequences. Nick, a man torn between upholding the law and facing his own ethical challenges, confronts Clyde, a mastermind of calculated vengeance. The story unfolds with suspenseful twists and reveals the blurred lines between right and wrong. As the explosive climax unfolds, even in death, Clyde taught Nick the lesson, never to not negotiate with a killer and that justice should prevail. That's all for today, folks. Like, share, and subscribe for more such content. Curious Knight signing off. Stay safe, stay curious.